white matter in the CNS. So white. Why is it white? Hopefully you're thinking myelin. Remember myelin? The myelin sheath is made of plasma membrane, cell membranes of oligodendrocytes in the case of CNS. And plasma membrane has lots of lipids, hence white in color. So really it's myelinated axons is what you should be thinking. So you should be thinking of connections. White matter indicates this is like a roadway or a power line that's connecting two parts to each other. And we call white matter in the CNS tracks. Tracks would be a bundle of axons heading from one place to another. And then we have various levels. I guess you could say it's really like lengths of the tracks and a little bit about location as well. Arcuate are the smallest. And so in this diagram here, this is from your book, so it has the labeled version. These little yellow ones you can barely see. So arcuate go within a lobe. So connections within, say, the occipital lobe down here, or connections within the parietal. Because you remember, like, parietal has to communicate with, say, primary somatosensory to sensory association areas, that kind of thing. So you have talking going on within a lobe, and then between lobes, there's one big long road called the longitudinal fasciculi, which is close in name to the longitudinal fissure, both of which go like anterior to posterior. So within a hemisphere, the longitudinal fasciculi connects, and there's little branches coming off on each lobe, but it connects occipital all the way to frontal, parietal, and there's some branches that'll go into temporal as well, and the insula. So longitudinal fasciculi is within a hemisphere. Arcuate's within a lobe. Now we're going to go beyond a single hemisphere. Commissural tracts. Quite simply, commissural tracts go, well, both ways, right to left to right. And these could be in the brain or the spinal cord. So, because we're in the CNS, could be either. So in this diagram here, the example would be these blue ones. They're going from right to left to right. So we call this going back and forth, right to left to right, decussation. Or the fibers, a verb, I guess, would be decussate. That means the fibers, the axonal fibers are going from right to left or left to right. And you know this happens a lot when I talked just recently about hemispheric lateralization. The right and left sides need to talk to each other. And then projection tracts. So these go up and down, quite simply. And really we're talking about up and down from brain to spinal cord. So these green tracks right here go up and down. So they would be two-way arrows because what's going up, hopefully you're thinking sensory information. What's coming down, hopefully you're thinking motor. Actually, it would be going up and down on both sides. Notice here, it's hard to see because I kind of drew a line over it, but they're crossing right there. That is an example of a decussation, where the fibers decussated a commissural tract. And that is a particular type of information that actually we'll learn a little bit more later. But just generally, projection tracts are going to go up to the brain for sensory information, down from the brain for motor. Okay, so I do want you to know the specific name of the biggest commissural tract. There's several, but the big one goes between the hemispheres of your cerebrum. And that is actually illustrated right here, this white area right here. And it would be coming towards us, so it's kind of hard to draw the lines. They didn't draw any lines there. It's actually this one as well. That's a different view. So hopefully, you know this view. This view is a medial view. This is one hemisphere, the right hemisphere. And this, what section is it? Frontal or coronal section. So we're looking like from the anterior, because I can see the cerebellum back there. So from the anterior, that's what this big commissural tract is going to look like. And its name is, it has a specific name, the corpus callosum. And it just connects the right and left hemispheres. So again, this is a, erase my other lines, this is a coronal or frontal section, and you can see the corpus callosum connecting the right and left halves there. So to make this section a medial view, you do have to take a sagittal section, but you don't have to cut maybe as much as you might think. I don't know. Because the hemispheres are separate. So you see this right there, there's a little crack there. That's the longitudinal fissure. and separating the right and left hemispheres. And actually, there would be a structure sitting in there to remind you. There's a structure that would come around and go like that. What on earth is that? What I just drew, that is the meningeal layer of dura. And that, actually, they would be stuck together in the middle. That would be the falx cerebri, one of those dural septa, one of those infoldings of dura. And down here, shouldn't have drawn it in blue. I'll switch to red. Venous blood, yes, should be blue, but if you can imagine, that would be the inferior sagittal sinus. So a space there for venous blood, and then the superior sagittal sinus will be up there. And then you have the periosteal layer of dura on top of it, and that's now made the sagittal sinus, the superior one, huge, but you get the idea. I just wanted to remind you that in a living person, there would be a falx cerebri right there in the longitudinal fissure. Okay, and then kind of the floor, I guess, of the longitudinal fissure is the corpus callosum right here, connecting myelinated axons going back and forth from the right to the left. And then here, in order to get a medial view, a sagittal section, if you had your scalpel and you started cutting, you wouldn't have to cut here. If the brain's already been dissected out, usually you take the dura off, and then you would just, not need to cut, just separate the hemispheres, and then finally you would need to cut right about here. Make a cut right where that vertical line is that I drew. And so that would end up cutting like all of this area. However, this foldy part up here, it's already separate. It wouldn't need to be cut at all. So in this diagram here, the medial view, or picture I should say, the medial view, this is the corpus callosum. It had to be cut, and it does make this kind of weird curve like that. That's your biggest commissural tract in your brain. And this is all cerebellum grain stuff, diencephalon that you don't need to worry about at this moment. You will soon. Just the corpus callosum, you should know. As long as we're here, there's some other stuff that hopefully will ring a bell. What are these things? It's two dark holes, and actually the same thing would be over here. Those are the lateral ventricles. So the corpus callosum forms like a roof on top of the lateral ventricles. And then there's this structure right here that I forgot to tell you what it is in any of my lecture videos. That is like, it's a membrane that's between the two lateral ventricles. That membrane, actually let me erase so you can see it. It's a thickish membrane, but there it is nonetheless. This membrane right here is called, I'll write it up here, septum pellucidum. It's a membrane that separates the left and the right lateral ventricles. Then you can see a little bit of the third ventricle right there. You can almost see the interventricular foramen, so right there. And here you can see that would be the left lateral ventricle that I just colored in. The septum pellucidum looks like it's gone, but if I look like this, you can see some inside the ventricle. That's choroid plexus. That's a bunch of ependymal cells that are making CSF if this person was still alive. The interventricular foramen would be right about there, and this would be the third ventricle. And that would lead down to the fourth. You can kind of see it pretty well, actually. If I drew an outline, I can, hopefully you can see it. So if this is the outline, that would be the third I just wrapped around. There's the cerebral aqueduct, and then expands out to the fourth between the brainstem and the cerebellum. So we got to add on a little bit of orientation as to where the ventricles are here as well. Oh, other things I want to point out, as long as we're here. I can't tell exactly where this slice is, but I'm pretty sure this is frontal lobe up here. But what I wanted to point out in particular, there's the insula. Remember, you had to peek between, this is definitely temporal lobe on these two sides, low down by your ears. This could be frontal or parietal, the red one. I'm honestly not sure. I'm guessing it's really close to like the border between the two of them. But this, tucked in there, that's your insula.